like to call this meeting of the Planning, Zoning, and Variance Committee to order. Would everyone please stand and we'll recite the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If everyone would please be seated and put your phones in off or silent mode. And may I ask the secretary for a roll call, please? Here. Here.
Here.
We have a quorum. And we don't have any approval of minutes to do. So let's move right on to the agenda, which is to approve two ordinances, Ordinance 570 and 571. And I think what I'd like to do is turn it over right away to the town manager or Fred Held to start this discussion, as opposed to my saying anything. we'll just move right on to the ordinance.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I'll just defer to our town attorney, Mr. Sweeney, at least in the terms of the context of the review of the Land Development Code in your role as a Planning, Zoning, and Variance Board, which doesn't necessarily require any action. We placed it for review, so I'll defer to him on that piece first.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mr. Harper. Thank you, Madam Chair. So you have two ordinances in front of you, and one, which is 571, is part of the update to the overall Land Development Code as part of our Phase 2 process, and I believe maybe some of you were either in attendance or saw the workshop and are aware. So that is here for, as is typical with any ordinance affecting development, zoning, land development in the town, this board would have an opportunity to weigh in on. The other ordinance, 570, is requested amendment to the comprehensive plan in conformance with some state requirements. That will have the board acting as the local planning agency, LPA, in just a couple minutes. So it's my recommendation that we take 571 first, and then once we are done with the official actions of the Planning, Zoning, and Variance Board, then transition into and put our hat on as the LPA. So I would respectfully ask that. That's my background. Let me turn it back over to Ms. Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. And just very briefly, to 571, narrowly in that scope, just for historical purposes, we know we've had Phase 1. For Phase 1, we did some staff work and background, had an open house, provided the Phase 1 changes for review, and that was ratified and ultimately passed by the council. Then we turned to Phase 2, which is where we are now. A similar process had occurred. We went ahead, sorry, I was thinking in my mind, Heather's telling me to speak into the microphone. So thank you. Sorry about that. So as to 571, we did prepare a presentation. We had an open house for that piece, and then now we have it here for review and basically more for informational purposes. And I say that relative to the board's role of not for this particular ordinance change, as distinguished from the next one that we'll talk about, doesn't require, per the town ordinances, a specific recommendation, yay or nay. But of course, in your very important role dealing with the Land Development Code regularly, we felt it was best to use the same process as we did with Phase 1 as we do with Phase 2. Now, with Phase 2, I did have the opportunity to meet with a couple of the board members and hear back from others on a number of items. And in terms of substance, staff is comfortable with where we are with the content of Phase 2, both for legal compliance and otherwise. There have been a couple of noteworthy statutes that have been passed at the state level that we'll now look at in what I'm calling Phase 3, but will really be sort of et al. We will just continue to have this process. And really, it'll be tied annually to the state legislative sessions. Sometimes those are a little early, depending on if it's a election year or a general election year or otherwise. But the idea and the goal is that we will just simply continue to do this on an annual basis, not just as it relates to the legislative session, which is critically important, but also for anything that has come around operationally throughout the year. And the goal is to try to present any changes that come up for ordinances, not just in the Land Development Code, but generally sort of comprehensively to council, annually if we can. There are certain things that we'll have to do because of effective dates and legal requirements. For example, what we'll talk about when this meeting technically closes and we go into the next one, which were deadlines for ordinances and comprehensive plan changes. So that's where we are with 571 and the attachment that we have to it. And I'm happy to try to answer any questions on this topic before the next scheduled event, which is first reading April 25th at the Town Council meeting.
I got a question. It's more about the state of Florida and its impact on the town. I would presume that the departments of the state level, the cabinets, would write up whatever they want the legislative session to approve or look at or whatever. And I would presume that they would have looked at all kinds of stuff and made a sweeping overhaul of what they wanted in the land development, for all the towns. Did they do that, or is it, every 2 years they decide to do something else? I mean, did they plan it out correctly, or is this an annual or biannual?
A couple things on that, and then I'll defer to our town attorney, Mr. Sweeney. The legislature, I think, deals with things in a variety of different ways. I think there's a longer list, but I'll just focus on maybe two. One, I think is more of a reactionary role, where something happens, and let's use, for example, Surfside condominium collapse, or the Parkland, the school shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. An event happens, the legislature reacts to that event, and it occurs. I think aspirationally, it would be great if there were some process that occurred regularly throughout the state with state agencies, but relative to prospective changes. Yeah. But I think similarly, when you have a body of law, the times that the people applying those things, and I can also ask Fred to jump in on the building code side, because that is sort of the second or really third piece of it is, when there is an application issue and the law has to be changed for whatever particular reason it happened to be. I don't know what the reason is, but at some point in time between 1981 and I think it was 86 or 89, this coastal construction control line changed. I'm sure
that was probably federal.
I'm sure some great research went into it. I don't know. I'm guardedly optimistic that somebody looked at it very closely, but that's how that would happen. And then the other way is sort of push from the ground up, and by that I mean various citizen groups, less so, but more either union or trade organizations about particular topics. For example, Fred, correct me, I'm probably wrong, the guidelines for like economic retainage relative to the building inspections and for the condos and things like that, that was actually all law for a long time, and then it either lapsed or repealed?
Correct. Yeah. That's correct. There were, back in the day, I mean, that was back in the 70s and 80s when Miami actually had condominium inspections, like milestone inspections that we're familiar with today, that was just put into effect a couple years ago. They actually had that back in the 70s and 80s, but then it sort of faded away. And then it was brought back again in the early 2000s. And then again, it faded away in Broward. It was still in Miami. And then because of the collapse that we had, again, the legislature brought it all back with new guidelines that we have to follow. But it's nothing that is new. It's not a new program to say, hey, wait a minute, we have to do these milestone inspections. It was in existence before, and engineers are aware of it and what they have to look at.
And real briefly, Fred, and narrowly in that area, the Florida Building Code is, I think, in my very pedestrian experience, kind of a different animal than a lot of other areas of statute because of the technical review nature of the particular requirements and really the practical application. And that is looked at in a little more systematic manner, I think, than, DUIs or sentencing laws or really, civil, thresholds for circuit court or county court. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, there's definitely prescriptive ways that you have to do things in order to follow the Florida Building Code and stay compliant with what the building code actually says you must do. So you have to follow that code to the T. You can't basically say, I'm going to do it this way and still think that you're going to be within the parameters of the Florida Building Code.
So I think the real long explanatory answer could probably be summed up, and sorry for the long explanatory answer, which is that I think it depends. In more technical areas, there's much more regular review. In a lot of the other areas, special interests, lobbyists, a major, public event, and then honestly, this is just Jim Harpering. I think it's the political concerns are at the top of the
Obviously, when you have a collapse, everybody's looking at everybody else. Hey, the inspector, the insurance guy, the residents, the board, just everybody in town. But, I agree with you. They have the laws.
Right.
And it basically comes down to, you got the law, and you probably have an enforcement officer, and he just didn't looking at condos, for whatever reason. He's looking at the Everglades, or he's looking at other stuff, because there's too many buildings, they didn't add any. And so it comes back to, you wrote this great law, and now we're back to it, but there's failures in the system that didn't enforce it, and makes everybody run around again. And
right,
it's a systemic problem as far as I'm concerned. It is what it is.
Yeah, and if nothing else, I'm always optimistic that the level of professionalism for our staff here is, we're paying really close attention, to those things because it is local to us.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And we're not huge, and we're not Miami. Where you have tons of condos and stuff like that. Just because this is a good body of work. And things have been clarified and moved around, but in the end, it comes down to how it's implemented.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it will be ongoing. Yeah.
Nobody reads the book, or nobody. No, it's an engineering book, and you don't use the book. So I write it.
Yeah. So in the end, it will be ongoing for us, and we think that's a good way to address those issues and concerns. So that's what I have relative to 571 in the Land Development Code. That's what I have.
And when do you expect that phase 3 will be started?
Yes, it has already begun. If you were to casually walk into my office, and I don't take binder creation lightly, you would see a binder on the middle of my desk that says phase 3 on it. And a lot of those things, some of them have to do with the legislative session that just occurred. Some of them have to do with other items that require a little more substantive discussion relative to not only their potential adoption, but as you rightly noted just a moment ago, what's the actual implementation look like? I've thought of brilliant stuff in my mind sitting at my desk before and wrote it up, and then when it had to be implemented, I asked myself what knucklehead wrote that, and then I looked in the mirror and it was me. So there are a number of those items, and we solicit. In other words, the LDC email continues to be up. We solicit input for those types of things.
So for right now, you'd just like us to approve these 2 ordinances?
Subject to however you'd like to, go ahead and go do that, that would be great.
Yes. So does anybody, Doris, do you have any other feedback? And we've provided feedback offline too. So would someone like to make a motion to approve ordinances 571?
I'd like to make a motion to approve ordinance 571 as written.
And do I have a second? Second. All in favor? Aye. And another motion, would someone like to make a motion?
One
Yes,
second,
I'm
Mr.
sorry.
Chair. So, no, we're good. So, in that capacity, thank you very much. So, I would say at this point, we are going to respectfully close as the planning, variance, zoning board, and then take up as the LPA 570. So,
Okay, so that's
if I may.
So I will call this formal meeting of
Yes.
planning, zoning, and variance to an end.
Yes.
And then we will open the
LPA.
LPA.
Yes, ma'am. And so for the LPA, it's ordinance number 570. And again, the reason why is,
570.
much like Mr. Harpering just elaborated on, there are specifically Bill 1379 that was signed into law last year and requires not just the town of Indian Shores, but all counties and cities in Florida to make sure their comprehensive plan elements are in conjunction and conformance with this. So that's what we proposed and respectfully ask that this board, as the LPA, recommend approval.
Do I have any questions from any of the board members? Or Mr. Held, would you like to make any comments or?
No comments on this one in particular. Thank you.
Okay, so does someone want to make a motion to approve ordinance 570?
I make a motion as the LPA to approve ordinance 570 as written.
Second. All in favor? Aye. So ordinance 570 has been recommended for approval.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
LPA. And so we can now call this portion of the meeting to an end, and then we can have an informal discussion unless anyone wants to raise anything publicly.
Madam Chair, I have nothing else to report other than obviously these will be going to council for first readings and such. So that'll be, as Mr. Harpering alluded to, at the end of the month for our regular meeting.
And anything else? Okay.
Can I ask
The LPA.
And I just wanted to ask a question. A while back, it's all about laws and enforcement and, what we want to enforce and what we don't want to enforce. Because some laws, like the speed limit, well, if you get close to it, you're good. The jungle trail, that's a protected area of the town. And a resident decided to just put in a dock over there and, remove the fauna and that sort of stuff and put in 3 algae plants. And that really broke everything in the jungle trail preservation ordinance. It was a subpart. And I think it involved, whether we went to court or not, I don't know. But to me, that's a flagrant violation, of what the town wants. And it's also an indicator of what future things could happen. Because I think at that meeting, there were like 8 other houses down the street that had the exact same issue. And when one guy does it, you do it, well, I'm going to do it. You're doing 60, I'm going to do 60.
So my question about that is, as I sit here,
So,
sound
if we
ignorant,
don't-
I'm completely unaware.
If we don't enforce one, 7 more are going to do it, and I can't blame them.
Well, the question that I have is, and this is probably best we just go off the record and talk about this, if you don't mind, since we're here, Heather, we can.
Yeah, we're in planning and zoning, and I'm happy to answer that, but it would probably be more of a code enforcement.
Well, it comes down to what I said before about, how we have laws and they're for a purpose. And, how we enforce or implement, what we want, for the public good.
I'm very happy to chat, I just think we should go off the record. Because we're still in the LPA meeting.
Technically. Yep.
So, Ms. Gundy, if you're
comfortable.
Yes, I'm comfortable. This could be an ongoing discussion for planning zoning.
I'm trying to understand.
Go ahead.
LPA meeting is adjourned.
Thank you very much, Heather. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So first, let me just add, so from our perspective, if